Well, you're watching Book TV on C-SPAN 2. We are at FreedomFest in Las Vegas interviewing some authors, and we want to introduce you to the author of this book, Latterday Liberty, A Gospel Approach to Government and Politics. Connor Boyack is the author. Mr. Boyack, what is the premise of your book?
The basic argument is that Mormons should be libertarians, and it's not something you see with a Mitt Romney or a Harry Reid, that we have very prominent Mormons who are entrenched in conservatism or liberalism. My argument is that the doctrines of our faith, the scriptures that we have, the teachings that we embrace, really support a more libertarian framework, a political framework. And of course I have to contextualize that. Many people, especially in our faith, think that libertarians are more, marijuana smoking, atheists. They have this conception of what a libertarian is, and so I distill down what liberty is, what a libertarian is, someone who embraces that liberty, and then I provide a bunch of resources to suggest why our Mormon faith supports a liberty point of view.
Well, first of all, where did the term Mormon come from?
Mormon is named after a prophet named Mormon. It's the Book of Mormon is another one of our books of faith, another set of scriptures apart from the Bible that we have. Mormon was the prophet who kind of compiled the record, and so it's a nickname that's used. The church's name is the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. We primarily call ourselves Latter-day Saints, but colloquially we're known as Mormons. So,
now, Mr. Boyack, Mormons are overwhelmingly Republican. Is that a fair statement?
Absolutely.
Today? Has that always been the case?
It hasn't. It's actually an interesting history. So in the first chapter of the book, I talk about how the parties have somewhat flip-flopped. The Republican Party was formed, among other reasons, to extinguish polygamy, which was quite prevalent among the Latter-day Saint population in early Utah. And so the Democrat Party was quite favorable to Mormons at the time, and people thought at the time in the LDS Church and the Mormon Church that you couldn't be a good Republican and a good Mormon. That was kind of the prevalent thought, whereas now it's reversed. Now the thinking is that, well, Harry Reid can't be a good Mormon, he's a Democrat and he supports abortion and these welfare policies. So it's quite flipped, and what I try to do in the book is say, let's not talk about parties. Parties come and go and their platforms can change. I'm more interested in the underlying principles, and so that's why I think I can peg it closer to libertarianism, whereas many people think in terms of Democrat or Republican or even conservatism and liberalism.
You write in Latter-day Liberty that Latter-day Saints have been instructed by numerous church leaders to promote wise laws and sound policies. Doing so requires discarding the false left-right political paradigm and approaching public policy from a principled perspective on every issue.
Yeah. I think a lot of times left and right are synonymous. We think that there is this dichotomy between conservatives and liberals. When I see them both as interventionists, as I say in the book, in their varying areas of interest, they support the government using coercion to force people to do things. When a basic element of our faith is this principle of moral agency, we should be free and unrestrained to choose what we want to do, to be held accountable for those things. And so coercion is really repugnant to the persuasion that instead should be used to try and get people to do the right thing. And so I don't see it as being between left and right. I see it as between persuasion and force. And so that's why I try and boil it down to the libertarian position is based upon persuasion, whereas force is used by both parties, by conservatism and liberalism, to support their varying areas of interest.
So let's take Harry Reid and Mitt Romney, who
Sure.
you've mentioned as examples. Does Harry Reid's politics make him a bad Mormon, a good Mormon, or doesn't it matter?
It depends who you ask and probably the issues that you ask. Certainly I find some of his issues objectionable, as I do Mitt Romney. For example, Harry Reid may be on his social welfare policies or his position on abortion, things that I find in conflict with the principles of our faith. I don't necessarily equate that to mean that he's a bad Mormon. Certainly plenty of Mormons have differing applications of these underlying principles. My aim with the book is to try and bring those principles more to the surface and suggest more consistent application of them to public policy. So the discussion, I don't think, should be, is he a good Mormon? Because if you try and say, well, if you're not correctly applying these principles to politics, that can apply to, I think, conservatives, liberals, everything in between, where there's just an inconsistency, in my view, between here's what we claim to believe and here's how it's being misapplied. So I think the same issue, for example, with Mitt Romney on warfare. I find his position on warfare to be quite repugnant to the principles of our faith. I don't think that means he's a bad Mormon. I simply think that he's inconsistent in applying the principles that we both claim to believe in to his position on something like war.
What can we learn about Mitt Romney as a potential president in your book?
Yeah, it's a good question with the election coming up. By no means is this a Mitt Romney book. It's not about people. It's not about parties. But many people have asked the question, and I think it's a fair one. I think what can be learned is, what does Mitt Romney's faith represent? Many people see Mitt Romney as the public reflection of what a Mormon is and should be. This kind of 1950s era clean-cut businessman. And taking away that veneer and pulling it down to the principles, I think this book can suggest to people what a Mormon, in my view at least, should believe when it comes to politics. I think they'll see the dichotomy between what I argue for and what Mitt Romney is now advocating on the campaign trail. But certainly, whether the question is about Mitt Romney or Harry Reid or any number of other Mormon people in positions of prominence in politics, it helps them understand what our doctrines are and how they might suggest an alternative course in politics.
Well, one of the underlying themes of your book is the separation of church and state.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's an important thing. It's a phrase that's used by many people, and I think misunderstood. Certainly we don't want the state intervening in issues of church and to religions. I think we definitely need church to be an influence in the state. Many people have this apoplectic fit when any type of pulpit pounding occurs and church leaders are speaking out against a candidate or an issue. Many people got upset when our church was involved in Proposition 8 in California, for example. I see these as perfectly legitimate. I think we need religious influence in politics. So that really is a basic premise of my book, is suggesting here are religious principles based on freedom, based on choice, based on independence. These are things I think we need to see more of in our political conversation and not less.
Where do you live?
I live in Utah.
And what do you do there?
I'm a web developer by trade. Recently I started a libertarian think tank, Libertas Institute, trying to spread the message of liberty at a state level there in Utah.
And what is the 10th Amendment Center?
10th Amendment Center is an organization with which I was recently affiliated for a couple of years. I was the director of the Utah chapter. It's a great national organization, the intent of which is to help state legislators push back against the federal government along constitutional lines. So, for example, with Obamacare, even though the Supreme Court upholds Obamacare and claims that it's constitutional, the 10th Amendment Center position on that would be nowhere under the Constitution's express limited delegated powers was the federal government given the authority over health care and issues of that relate to that. Therefore, we as the states need to fight back. And so it's a principle that I support and have been very much involved in Utah.
Connor Boyack, if people read Latter-day Liberty, what will they learn about the Church of Latter-day Saints?
They will learn some of the essential doctrines upon which our faith are based. I mentioned moral agency, for example. We believe in modern living prophets. We believe that revelation continues to come from God and can direct the affairs of our individual lives and even public policy. We believe that God speaks to man. We believe that the things that he says should be applied to the public sphere at large, and whether that's myself as an insignificant person teaching those issues or someone in a position of leadership being able to apply those issues. We think that is of extreme importance, and that's why I've offered this book to the public.
Who is Marion Romney?
Who is Marion Romney? Marion G. Romney was a member of church leadership, very high ranking. I forget the relation to Mitt Romney. I think he was a great uncle or something of that effect. He was an ardent opponent of socialism. Back in the day when the conversation was more, communism and socialism, Ezra Taft Benson was another familiar name to many who carried the same tune. But the Romney name certainly is going to catch people's eye, I think. I do talk about Marion G. Romney there. He was very outspoken in his views of the importance of individualism, of taking care of one another, the basic principles upon which liberty are based. And so he's one of many church leaders who I've included in the book that have talked about this. My intent is to compile those statements and the scriptures and make a single case for liberty.
Who was Brigham Young?
Brigham Young was the prophet of our church after the founder Joseph Smith, the founding prophet. He was directly involved in leading the Latter-day Saints westward in their migration towards what is now Utah, after they were basically expelled from their homes and forced out. They migrated westward. He was a colonizer. He was a great leader for a long time of the church. He built many temples there in Utah, and he was the governor of the territorial area of Utah. So he was kind of the head both of church and state for quite a while before Utah was a state. A great man, a very outspoken man on many things, and so he's very well known to Utahns and Americans at large, really.
What can we learn from his political involvement? Because he was governor, but he was also quite involved in national politics, wasn't he?
It's hard when the same person is both a religious head and a political head. There are certainly many concerns I have with some of the things that were done because of that direct mixture between the two, and I think it was right to eventually separate them as they did. He was quite outspoken in the importance of self-reliance, for example, and helping people to, the Latter-day Saints specifically in Utah, to become independent and able to take care of one another. That really is one of the core messages, I think, of liberty that we see lacking today, is the importance of responsibility, that we should not be relying on the government to take care of one another, take care of ourselves. We should be doing that to one another. Liberty is predicated on responsibility, personal responsibility, helping one another. That is one of the core messages I find in Brigham Young's teachings that I see implemented across Utah when he was colonizing it. I think we could use a little bit more of that today.
Back to your book, Latter-day Liberty, you write, "Those who don't know any better might be led to believe that the Libertarian Party is the natural home of libertarians and the proper embodiment of their political principles."
Mm-hmm. I disagree with that, and that's one of the concerns I have, that many people call me a small or a lowercase l libertarian, a capital L member of the Libertarian Party. Libertarians are found anywhere and everywhere. Many libertarians are disenfranchised with politics and political parties. They're members of no party. They're independent. They're, in Utah especially, where the Republican Party has so much strength, they're members of the Republican Party. Again, and as I try and do in the book, I don't think our conversation should be about parties. It should be about principles. And so what I define as libertarian is merely someone who supports the political philosophy of liberty. You can be a member of any party or no party along with that, but I think there is a danger to apply labels to people and say, well, you members of the Libertarian Party, therefore this is what you believe, I'm going to put you into this box. I'd rather talk about the principles, the issues, and we can infiltrate or be members of any party or no party. We should be talking about ideas and not affiliations to an institution, I think.
So, but practically when it comes to election time, where does that leave you? Does that leave you voting for Gary Johnson for president, the Libertarian Party candidate, Mitt Romney, the Republican,
right,
Barack Obama?
Every person has to decide that differently. I myself am a very, very strong Ron Paul supporter, and I'm considering voting for Gary Johnson. Certainly libertarians are disenfranchised with the two-party system and the candidates that system produces. We're trying to find the best way to agitate for liberty. Ron Paul has been a great person to advance that and get that message out. Gary Johnson is doing his part. Many libertarians disagree that a candidate, even a libertarian-leaning one or a full-on libertarian one, would be able to be true to his principles once in office. The system is so stacked against the principles of liberty, the inertia that's involved, that many people become disenfranchised and simply think we need to focus more on education, on persuasion, on getting people to be self-reliant and take care of themselves so that they're not so dependent upon the government. So I don't know that focusing so much on the presidential election will have a significantly consequential outcome for liberty, even if we got someone like a Ron Paul or Gary Johnson involved, other than simply spreading the message, having a bully pulpit, finding ways to present issues to people and get them to think about liberty, not necessarily to legislate liberty or through executive orders impose liberty on people, but to have avenues by which we can spread the message more effectively.
Why do you write about natural law in this book?
Natural law is an easy term to use to people who aren't religious, who believe in the ability to be free of any coercive restraints from other people. that our rights don't come from government, that they come from our innate humanity. So as Latter-day Saints, we believe that God does exist. God has given us these rights. We derive them from Him. But if you talk to an atheist, an agnostic, someone who maybe isn't a Christian, what have you, natural law is a different definition of the same underlying principle, and that is our rights come from us and not from government. Whether we receive those rights because of our innate humanity and the fact that we are human beings, or because we are God's children, what the precedence, how those rights came to us is not so much important in terms of what government should do, as is the fact that government has not given us those rights. We have delegated to government certain powers. It's a great way to kind of unify people around the message of liberty, whether they believe that our liberty comes from God or not.
Connor Boyack, as a libertarian and a Mormon, how do you come down on practical issues such as the war on drugs, gay marriage, things like that?
Certainly important issues. So in the book, the first half is all about principles and theology, setting the framework for what liberty is. Second half of the book dedicates one chapter to many of these issues, one of which is the war on drugs. It's really easy to believe the conventional, the superficial, what's in the media of the war on drugs is good, these drugs need to be bad, cocaine will be sold at every street corner if we legalize drugs. I really try and dig deep into the issues and say, well, if we understand liberty, what is the proper application of that? To the war on drugs, I don't have the right to aggress against you because you want to grow a marijuana plant, for example, and ingest it. To the extent that drugs are used in crime and things, then certainly that introduces the opportunity to talk about government intervention. But to the extent that a person is doing what they want, even if it's something I disagree with, especially as a Mormon, I think that God has forbidden certain things. We have a moral code, this word of wisdom, this health code to which we adhere. I'm not going to enforce that upon others as long as they're not violating my rights. I therefore can't delegate to the government the power to do that on my behalf. So same-sex marriage, for example, I don't believe that the government has the right to sanction any personal relationship. This should be an institution of the churches, a personal contract. To the extent that we allow government to control the nature of our relationships, something that I find to be a very sacred relationship that God has instituted, I don't like giving government that power. Whenever government is given that power, the authority is centralized in an institution, it becomes a political game to determine through elections who can win that power and then impose whatever they want, their own social dictates upon other people. I think there is a threat of same-sex marriage. Many Mormons would feel that way. We feel that that's a violation of God's definition of marriage. I don't think legislatively legislative solutions are the appropriate mechanism for solving that. I think extricating government altogether is the proper way. We can have our own definition of marriage. You can call it what you want. I equate it largely to baptism. You know, we would freak out if the government started dictating the manner and methods of baptism, and yet many churches have differing methods. It's fine that another person might be baptized according to the terms and conditions of their church and their own beliefs. I don't want that imposed upon me. I'm not going to impose it upon them. I think marriage should be returned back to the churches. Many issues like that, I think the ultimate solution is this should be something that through persuasion, through voluntary associations, we can resolve. Let's get the government out of it. Let's reduce the government only to its proper size and scope, which is defending the persons and property and defending aggression.
So are those positions that you've just enunciated, are they in contrast or in conflict with the Mormon Church?
The Mormon Church is a very diverse group. Many people define the Mormon Church as the leadership, and I don't know how the leadership votes. That's certainly a private thing, and especially in recent years, they've taken on a very strong political neutrality. They believe that Mormons, members of our church, can be good Mormons and be members of any political party or no party. And so it's hard, even when you draw the statistics out of, a predominant number of Mormons are conservatives or Republicans, it's hard to say what Mormonism represents politically. I advocate that it should be a more libertarian point of view, but when you look at polls, when you look at voting records in Utah, for example, where there's a prevalent number of Mormons, by no means is it a libertarian type of undercurrent that's guiding all of these Mormons. So I'm trying to advocate a change. I think those trends are a deviation from what the principles of our faith are. I'd like to pull more people towards liberty, but right now that is quite far off, and so I've got a lot of work to do.
Connor Boyack has been our guest here on Book TV. This is his book, Latter-day Liberty, A Gospel Approach to Government and Politics. Mr. Boyack, thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
This is Book TV on C-SPAN 2.